So we talked about it at length on the channel, but for years, the US smartphone market in particular has been a two-horse race. If you're buying a phone in North America, you're probably almost certainly picking between an iPhone or a Galaxy phone. It's a comfortable, if slightly boring duopoly that has kind of defined the mobile landscape for the better part of a decade at this point. But if you look closely at the cracks appearing in this status quo, I think there's a sense that the wind, or at least the direction of that wind, might be starting to change. Let's get into it in this video. If you're enjoying these deep dives into the shifting power dynamics of the tech world, then hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out more than you know, and it keeps you in the loop on all of our latest commentary videos and everything else in between. Cheers. So let's be real for a second. The Apple versus Samsung era has really felt like a stalemate for a long time. We've reached a point where hardware innovation has more or less slowed to a crawl, and almost all flagship phones are just minor refinements of the previous year's model. Although I will say, the iPhone 17 series is a much bigger leap than the S26 lineup for what it's worth, but while the big two have been busy settling into their respective corners, the rest of the Android space has been undergoing a bit of a painful contraction. We've seen brands that were once household names exit the space entirely or retreat into their own niche enthusiast-only categories. It is really survival of the fittest out there right now, and as sales for traditional budget or value players begin to shrink, a vacuum is opening up, and I think this is exactly where Google is finally starting to make some gains and flex their own muscles. For a long time, the Pixel was, to put it mildly, an enthusiast choice, a niche choice. The phone you bought if you wanted the cleanest version of Android, but were willing to put up with, let's be real for another moment, maybe some janky hardware or potentially mediocre battery life. But now, 10 iterations deep into the Pixel journey, and it really does feel like Google has started to hit its stride. The Pixel 9, for example, and to a lesser extent the Pixel 8 series, was probably the most polished hardware the company has ever produced, shedding that beta product feel that kind of plagued the lineup for the last few versions. The sales figures are also starting to back this up. We're seeing Pixel market share creep up, particularly in the US, often at the expense of those mid-tier players that might not necessarily be able to compete with Google's marketing machine. It obviously turns out that if you spend enough money on a Super Bowl ad, NBA partnerships and everything else in between, people actually start to notice that your phone exists. Who would have thought it? Now, the expansion into more global regions has been slow and steady as another process, and honestly, I do think that might be by design. In many parts of the world, cheaper Chinese brands like Xiaomi, Oppo, Realme, Tecno, and others out there absolutely dominate their respective markets by offering incredible specifications for half the price of everyone else. And that's a hard deal to pass up if your money is tighter. Google really isn't going to win a price war in India or Southeast Asia right now, put it that way. Instead, they're focusing on the more high-end, high-margin markets like the US and Europe, for example, where they can actually compete more readily with Apple and Samsung on brand prestige and that all-important software experience. Speaking of the software a second now, I think this is where the Pixel is really starting to separate itself from the pack more than it ever has done before. While most OEMs have made great strides in this key component, many are still struggling to provide consistent long-term updates for their latest hardware. A few years back, Google moved the goalpost by offering 7 years of support with their first Pixel 8 phone. This isn't just about security patches either. I think it's about building a big, happy fan base that feels like their $1,000 investment, even if they bought it on a sell plan, isn't going to be obsolete in just 3 years' time. It's a long-term play to build trust, something that has historically been Android's biggest weakness, especially compared to the iPhone. Yes, Samsung now also match that with their own 7-year support cycle, but only on selected hardware. Google is actually doing it top to bottom of their admittedly small product portfolio. There isn't another Android maker though that can say the same. So yes, Google is responsible for that software stack running on your phone right now, but it is a long overdue consideration and a really good implementation, and potentially is a buying consideration for lots of people out there. We need to look a little bit under the hood for a moment though, because I do think the Pixel is now a bit of a Trojan horse, because Google isn't actually selling you a piece of glass and metal like they used to. They're actually selling you potentially a gateway to their biggest product, and that is Gemini. So as the company moves away from the traditional Google Assistant and leans into a multimodal AI platform that they've built from the ground up, the Pixel actually serves as the premier showcase for what the future of smartphone interaction and potentially software looks like. By integrating Gemini deeply into apps like Photos to Gmail, Google is really creating their own ecosystem with AI as the backing, that might become increasingly hard for people to leave. While Apple's still been trying to find its footing with Apple Intelligence, Google's been shipping functional AI-driven features for a number of years now, and the integration is one of the key components here. It's one thing to have a chatbot, it's another to have an AI that actually understands the context of your digital life, because it lives inside your phone's operating system. Gemini is the real product as far as I'm concerned, and the Pixel today feels like simply the best way to integrate it into your life by getting it into your pocket. I'm naturally a skeptic though when it comes to the AI everywhere narrative, but I am a little bit of a hypocrite because I use Gemini almost daily for various little tasks. But the truth of the matter is, Gemini is the weapon that Google is potentially using to win the AI war. The Pixel lineup is just another delivery mechanism for them. The company has the cash, they have the runway, and they have a massive user base outside of the Pixel to effectively out-integrate the competition, with a phone being a key component within that. Despite all this bluster about AI and Gemini being a new Trojan horse, the key to long-term success though for Google is actually a lot simpler. They just need to keep making competent devices. For years, the Pixel was held back by silly hardware issues, overheating chips, RAM management problems, terrible network connectivity, bad fingerprint scanners, subpar battery life, or displays that weren't quite bright enough. We could go on forever about little tiny problems that have suffered or faced every single device. The past 3 years though have resolved lots of these long-held complaints and recurring problems. Sure, like any piece of technology, the Pixel is not perfect, but the company is finally starting to make competent products that don't compromise in one or two key areas that a lot of people make a decision on based upon whether they're going to buy them or not. The Pixel 10 series is another prime example as well of this refinement over redefinement playbook that I think has been gone on since the Pixel 8 series. Practically the same phone as the Pixel 9, which means it's by no means a revolutionary device, it's just a solid, reliable phone that doesn't have the glaring faults of its predecessors. By finally nailing the basics, Google is actually making it easier than ever for iPhone users to look across the fence and think, yeah, I could live with that and I could get on with that. To that end, we're moving away from the era of janky Android and one where the Pixel is a genuine premium alternative to the iPhone and the Samsung Galaxy series for lots of people. With practically no foothold in the market, Google has done really well to shoehorn the Pixel into the conversation of the buying decisions of many people, which again deserves credit in its own right. And if Google can stay in the game long enough by offering consistent hardware at competitive prices, something that I don't necessarily think they've been doing as much recently, the company will continue to make gains with their smartphone hardware. The thing is, the landscape of the US mobile market is changing. It's no longer just a two-player game. Google spent 10 years learning from its mistakes, and the company's finally building a product that can stand on its own 2 feet. Whether they can actually unseat Samsung as the Android king remains to be seen, but they're certainly doing enough to make the competition sweat a little bit more than they did in a long time. In the end though, staying in the game is half the battle. While other brands are packing up and going home, Google is doubling down. They've realized that as long as they keep making good phones, the power of their software and the ubiquity of their AI will probably do the rest of the heavy lifting for them. I want to ask you though, what do you think? Is the Pixel finally a serious contender, or are you sticking with the big two? Does the promise of 7 years of updates actually sway buying decisions? I'm really interested to hear about that. Or is it all about the hardware for you? Do you care about the latest chip, the latest and greatest as it were? Let me know down in the comment sections below. It's a really interesting time for the industry, as I do think some of the old guard are being challenged by the very company that built the platform they run on. Yeah, interesting to say the least. But cheers for watching, and I'll speak to you later.